this is Child Development 107, Chapter 11. I'm going to focus most on the second half, which is different brains and different bodies, which is really great because I'm glad that the book actually talks about this stuff. It's important. So let me share the screen like I've never done before. Okay, good. Okay, good. Where is it? Where's my 17 screens? There we go. Yay. Now, again, when kids' bodies, when they get a little bit older into middle childhood, again, we're talking about like 4th grade, 3rd grade, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. That's a nice chunk. Again, you're starting to see, by the way, your puberty stuff has already started on the inside. Yeah. Like you might not see, well, let me take it back. I've seen 4th graders starting to get like shapes and boobs and stuff. Some girls will get their periods at 10, which is, I guess, around 4th, 5th grade. And so definitely things are already moving. By the age of 7, your primary sex characteristics, meaning like your ovaries, everything on the inside, ovaries, testicles, everything's dropping, moving, developing, maturing. So when puberty hits, this is what we're ready for. And so it's interesting to think that, you know, puberty just comes out of the blue. No, there's a little bit of signs. You'll start to see some dysregulation in a child around this age. And I don't just mean emotional, their bodies do. Yeah. So we're all getting ready for the big time, but at the same time, this starts right there. So again, our rhetorical question section includes, hold on, does physical activity affect psychological health? You guys already know the answer to that. What is it?
Yes.
Yeah, shocking, right? Shocking. By the way, studies show that kids who can run around at recess can come back and focus more because the blood's flowing. However, I can tell you from personal experience, coming back to a non-preferred subject is very challenging. Right. So if you were like out there and you were like playing soccer with like your besties and you were like killing it, and it feels good, and you've got that full lung capacity, you feel good, you're sweaty, and you come sit and you do your worst subject, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. So number 2, why are IQ tests not used as often as they were a few decades ago? Yeah, we don't really use a whole lot of IQ tests. In fact, in the state of California, in public school, it is illegal to give an IQ test to a person of color, specifically a Black student. Yeah, that was legislation that passed in 1979 that said that IQ tests are culturally saturated, which they are. Meaning there's things that you're taught in one culture, one community that you would never be taught in another community except for we're testing you on that. And when a lot of students didn't cut the mustard or had a really low number, they got shuffled right into special needs. And that doesn't mean that they were dumb, right? Maybe they just didn't know the language, or maybe just didn't know the question. One of the questions, so the IQ test is 12 different tests, right? And then we add it up and kind of take an average. But it's more like manipulating blocks or doing words or doing pictures or rotating things in your mind. There's a bunch of different dimensions, but there's the one of them on trivia is the one that closely matches the overall score. So if you just gave anybody the trivia section out of the standardized IQ test, that would kind of give you an idea of where the IQ would land. So again, when Peyton started school, they were saying, you know, is he Black? Then we have to know, because we can't give an IQ test. It's illegal. I was like, well, I mean, I have eyes. I don't know if he's Black because his paperwork says Mexican and white. So I'm telling you what they told me. But then they're like, but listen, if we do it and he really does, we're going to get sued. And I was like, they said, can you guarantee that he does not have 1% African American? I was like, no. They're like, okay, so let's put that down that he doesn't. So now for everywhere now, like census and everything, I say Mexican, white, and African American. I just keep it simple. And so to get an IQ test for Peyton, I had to get it through my medical provider. And he was about 7 when we got it done, because it's not that IQ was an issue. We were just thinking that maybe he was now bored in class. You know how sometimes smart kids get bored and then they cause trouble. So we did that. No, his IQ it's above average, but it's not crazy above average, right? So we could at least put that to the side. By the way, he's still bored. You don't have to be super smart to be bored. You can just be bored, right? And by the way, what do you guys know about IQ scores? What's the average?
is it like 100?
Yep, 100 is average. And so we'll see in, let's double check, see if I have it. Yeah, I think in here, when we talk about the special brain, special bodies, about gifted kids, the bell curve is in here. We'll talk about that. So yeah, 100 is average. So there's half of the population is above 100, half the population is below 100. That's how averages work. And so again, IQ does correlate to certain special needs, but I'm telling you, you can have really smart people who have like no social skills, right? We've learned of like really smart people who just like have no social skills, or you have people who have super low IQ and are happy all the time, right? So IQ isn't really it is not a determinant of special brains and special bodies, but it can give us some clues, right? The equivalent would be EQ, which is emotional quotient instead of intelligence quotient. So if you ever run across Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, it's a good one. Basically says you can be as smart as you want, but you could be a scientist, be smart as you want, but if you can't get along with people, then what's the point? Yeah. And by the way, that's why I like when we work in groups and stuff like that, so we can get along with people. Number 3, should children who are special with unusual gifts or disabilities be in special classes? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I'm going to try to get through these first 10 pretty quick. So middle childhood, again, roughly ages 6 to 11. Some kids get there a little bit earlier. Some kids stay a little bit later. Hey, little man. He's like, mommy's in school. I love it. How old is he? 6? You said 6?
He's going to be 2 in February. He's standing on a chair right now.
Okay.
Taller.
Oh my God, he's gonna be tall, huh? Hi, tall boy.
Hi.
Hey, what's up?
What's your name?
Jonathan?
Yeah.
I like that name. Are you named after your daddy?
Daddy.
How old are you? This many?
Yeah, what are we doing?
What are we doing? We're talking. We have school. Welcome to school.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, well, see, here's the thing. You're doing it. It must be cool. So I got to be in your business. Yeah. Okay. We got it.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah. Oh, what are you doing? Again, that she knows exactly what I'm saying about not going to the bathroom alone for 13 years. Seriously. I locked the door. I locked the door. He picks the lock.
He puts the fingers under the crack.
I was trying to take a bath and like detox. I had electric candles on, put my phone out of the room, lock the door. He unplugs my phone and slips it under the door. Mom, what are you doing without your phone? I was like, just wanted to be away from it for a minute. What are you doing without your phone? Like, it's not surgically attached to my hand. So I just need to get away. So here's the best part about this age. They're actually very, very healthy. Kind of, they got over the infant section and they got over the early childhood section. This is when they're like healthy. But this is also when you like things like asthma show up. With a developing body, and by the way, people don't realize this, that your outside of your body and your inside of your body don't necessarily grow at the same rate. It took me a while to figure this one out too. So you can have an outside body. Have you seen kids go through a growth spurt, or maybe you or me or whatever? Like their body gets really like something, like their body grows. Sometimes they get whiter and then they get taller. So like Peyton would like, he goes through this period of like eating like a horse and he never gets whiter. But then I see that as like well, other kids would get whiter, but he's going to now get taller. I give it like, he starts going through like a 12-inch like Subway sandwich or like a double, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, oof, that's a lot for like a 90-pound kid, you know? And then sure enough, like in a month, he's gained 3 to 5. And I'm like, all right, we're good. So they do this thing where they go wide and tall and wide and tall. But guess what? Your insides might do it differently. Your insides might be like let's say your lungs, your bladder, your intestines, everything can actually grow and start to push. And it's not like you feel it, but there's a thing where around this time, this is when asthma shows up, because the lungs maybe aren't developing as fast, or they're actually developing too fast and they're actually too big for the lung cavity. There's like a bunch of different reasons why asthma shows up. Obviously, there's a familial link or a genetic link, but you'll see kids now with, you know, developing asthma. Some kids develop it earlier, some kids develop it later. Sometimes there's like a teenage asthma situation that it's there for a couple of years and then it's gone. Has to do with the developing lungs. So that's kind of there's these little quirks, and same thing with bladder. Like if you have a kid who's going to the bathroom a lot, sometimes their bladder got bigger and their body's just waiting to have that growth spurt. It's really kind of interesting. So unless they only have to go to the bathroom during math class, then we'll talk about something different. Yeah. And again, then there's like a bunch of vaccines. There's like 7-year-old vaccines. There's like 7th grade vaccines, or like 12-year-old vaccines. There's a lot going on at this age. But again, generally a very healthy time, right? Obviously they talk in school and even in kindergarten about oral health, but again, what people don't realize is that if your teeth are bad, you could have bad heart valves. I mean, like bacteria in your mouth goes right down to your heart. Yeah, so when kids don't brush right, it could actually set up heart disease. It's really interesting. And by the way, that is a child abuse reportable event, meaning if parents keep their kids out of school, I'm sorry, out of the dentist, they can be put up for neglect. Yeah, bad teeth are bad teeth. That's not a good one, right? And I really like this picture of this young man. So I'm assuming this little girl right here is about 12. This kid's about maybe 10, or maybe she's more like 9. She's somewhere in there, but she's like polished and dialed and like, she's like, what's up? I got my shorts to match my shirt, and I got my braid, and I got my earrings. Yeah. I'm like, I probably got like some killer, like, you know, shoes or whatever. This guy's like, pretty much wearing my Superman shirt for the 11th day in a row. I mean, equally as happy, right? Equally as healthy, right? But it's just like, you see this, like, I'm telling you, by kindergarten, you already see the girls who are like, I need the pink sparkly purse, the rainbow this, I need my shoes like this, I need my hair like that. And not all girls, right? But then the boys, seriously, pick a nose and grab ass until like forever. You see them like lined up at school and you're like, well, obviously they're not lining up right now, but like you see them, like the girls, like their folder popped out on one hip and they're already talking about, like, even first graders, oh, that boy has such cute eyes. And you're like, right? And then the boys are like, huh? What? Like, seriously, they're just different. It's just so fantastic. And that's why I like the book put these two pictures in there, right? But again, overall health, like these boys are running around, right? There's studies that show that the testosterone in our bodies actually helps boys process more information when they're moving. So yeah, I mean, recess is super important. And I have a pet peeve at school when they take recess away. Well, you're misbehaving, so you just have to stay in at recess. Teacher, that is a backfire on you. That kid's going to be like a pent up fire. It's going to be like fireworks in a glass jar, and like, give it an hour. You're in trouble. So it's one of these things where like, maybe they're going to not do recess, but they have to go run laps. So it's like, they could be out there and they got to do something, but don't ever take recess away, FYI. And again, when you're healthy and you're eating right and your gums are good and you have all the oxygen flowing, you're processing information. Your brain is still growing, not as fast as infancy, but this reaction time shortens, right? So then you'll start to see in the 6th grade where they have like the softball games against the teachers, right? So it's like, ooh, 6th graders are going to fight the teachers and whatnot. And so because their bodies are starting getting, you know, teachers are getting older and these students are getting stronger, so it's a little bit more evenly matched, right? And I like this one too. Neighborhood play is huge. For us, it's kind of like, I know Peyton does sports at school. He does have recess. He does have lunch. They have a small but really nice facility with even those like exercise equipment things at school. Yeah. They're like the ones that you see at a really nice park along a trail, like stop and do this one or push with your legs or like, I don't know, whatever. So he can burn off some steam. They still even have like a swing set or whatever, and like a set of couches for them to like chit chat or whatever. It's small, but it's nice. And but we found out that when he runs around, which he needs to at recess, coming back, that transition is very difficult. But the neighborhood play for us is very important too, because every kid on our street goes to a different school. Yeah, I have kids across the street. So and I live in Santa Ana, just down the hill from like 17th and Newport, like down there. And our neighbors across the street go like drive their kids all the way to Mariners Church, which is like way down there, like Turtle Rock or whatever, like way down there, Newport Coast. And then we have kids that go to the local school, and then we have kids who go to a private school, and then we have to go to a charter school, and then we have kids who are homeschooled. Like, so we have an interesting mix, and neighborhood play is all about it. It's all about you guys remember playing with your neighbors? What did you guys do for neighborhood play? What was your most fun thing to do?
I remember we used to play like street hockey in like our cul-de-sac. Because our next door neighbors were like, the girl was my age and then the boy was my older brother's age. So it was
Nice.
perfect.
Perfect.
We just like do a lot of like sport related stuff.
Yeah.
Like outside.
And cul-de-sacs are the best.
Yeah.
You have to be like, car.
Yeah, it was super nice. But now like they like moved away, and then like 2 new families moved in, and they have like little kids, and like they're always playing in the cul-de-sac. So like
it's nice to see.
Yeah.
It's
It's
nice
like
to
weird, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm like when I grew up, I only had like there was like a group home across the street from me, and so every once in a while there was a kid who was my age, and so we did a lot of like hiding in bushes and that kind of silly stuff or whatever, riding bikes and things like that. But yeah, I think it's important because again, you see the same people at school, and by the way, you do kind of get sick of people. Like, I mean, like, not to be mean, but like there's a thing where you need to mix it up, right? So, and plus it teaches kids that maybe rules at school are different than rules at the neighborhood, right? So teaching multiple styles of relationship is very, very important at this age. It's really nice. And so we'll talk more about that in the emotional section in chapter 13. But I love this picture right here. I'm assuming all these girls are related, but as a mom, I see the smallest one at the highest level, and she's just sitting there. The rest of them are pretty comfortable up a tree. She's like, oh my God, I'm so tall. Look at me, I'm so tall. I'm so tall. Look how I'm a big girl. And like the mom's like, here, sit here, I'm gonna take a picture, and the rest of them are just kind of ignoring it. But I don't even see this as neighborhood, right? I see this as like around the lake in the summer, right? They're all barefoot, they're eating watermelon. Not exactly neighborhood, it's not exactly what I would put Heinrich for a picture, but play is super important. It actually is practice for the future. It really is. It really is. And so when they can talk about, oh, I'm good at the bike, or you're my BFF, no, you're my BFF, like even that is practice for the future. So if we can get kids outside more, huge, that's huge. And yeah, for us, it's an imperative. He's got to go burn off steam, but we also mitigate how much time he's with neighbors because he's so much. Right. So basically he's like every 30 minutes, he's got to come back and check in, or we have walkie-talkies because he's just intense and he doesn't always listen to other people. So it also teaches them frustration tolerance and compromise, right? It's social skills. It's like social skills training. And so it's super important, even for, kids who are typical, even for kids who are not. We talked about exercise in school. Middle childhood, sometimes you'll start to see this hormonal shift and the weight start packing on. But again, it kind of, there's a lot of different factors with that. The genetic marker for obesity is not just one. And it's not a switch that turns on and off. It's a dimmer switch, just like you're turning a light on really, really. Like right now, like my genes for being overweight are like, yeah, right now, yay. You sit in front of a computer and you don't like exercise, woohoo. But when I exercise and I eat right, it's like the dimmer switch goes down. Absolutely. There's multiple factors, multifactorial expression. So again, it's about habit forming. It's about habit forming. It's hard though, because for me, because I have a different body than my kid, he can eat whatever he wants, whenever he wants. We do curtail the sugar a little bit. But he also sneaks food. It's like, are you hungry? Or are you just trying to get away with something? He's like, just trying to get away with something. So if you're not hungry, then get away with something else, man. You're making a mess in your room. It's like, found the entire bread bag wrapper in his room. Your room was like literally 5 steps from the kitchen. You had to bring the bag in the room. Like, I don't know. But I'm the worst. He said, you're the worst mom in the history of moms, and you cannot be my mom right now. And I was like, cool. Can I take a break? Because I do want to take another bath. Just leave me alone this time. Right? Or he goes, I do not like you right now, but I still love you, I guess. And I'm like, samesies. Like, you're hard to take, buddy, but I do love you, and I might not like you right now. So we all know a little bit about BMI, right? Body mass index. And again, obesity is on the rise. America is like overweight. It's not a big shocker, but here's the deal. Again, there's not one reason why that occurs. There's several reasons why that occurs, right? Our food is hyper processed. We are all addicted to sugar or alcohol or some form of that. Our carbohydrates have been refined so fast that our body processes them as sugar. You know, eat like a piece of white bread or a tortilla, like it gets processed in our body as white sugar. And what that does is create an insulin response. And then over time, when that insulin response gets worn out, then somebody gets diabetes. And diabetes is on the rise with children. So type 1 is when they're born with it. Type 2 is when it develops over time. But again, the answer is yes, partially genes, partially parents, partially policies, and partially our choices. Yeah. So again, not a big shocker when it comes to this. And again, asthma, big picture that shows up right now. I like this one this picture talking about it, that it's a sign of status symbol. In some city schools, asthma is so common that using an inhaler is a sign of prestige, as suggested by the facial expressions of these 2 boys. Staring at him. This guy's like in the, in the middle of the room. But when they say some city schools, they're saying urban environments. So like when you live in a significantly urban city where, you take the L or the train to school, or you just walk and there's no grass, like a urban city. Asthma is higher in urban cities because there's less trees to filter out the carbon monoxide that comes from the automobiles and whatnot. So you'll see like some of the highest levels of diabetes in our schools are in like Detroit. Which is really interesting. Although there's this huge movement to green up Detroit with all these empty buildings or industries that pulled out, like the cars industry. They're like revamping these buildings to be like green walls and green everything and stuff like that. So we'll see if that changes the asthma. Yeah. But again, it's a pretty serious illness. And if it's chronic and lifelong, it can be considered something that's so significant that the student is under special care at school, under a certain like plan where you have to get everybody in the room. It's called an IEP. Sometimes asthma can be so bad they're on an IEP, meaning like, what do we do in case an asthma attack happens? And what if she's in the hospital for asthma? Like, how much homework can we figure out? Like, there's sometimes asthma can be that bad. It's the #1 reason why students miss school. #1. It's not the flu. It's not the cold. It's asthma. Yeah. So it's interesting. That's mostly environmental, but there is a genetic component to that. Again, when kids can't breathe easy, they can't learn. Big surprise? No, not at all. This is really interesting because this talks about, again, by breakdown of cultures and ethnicities here. The US average is about here. It's about 15 for every 100, right? Percent. No, 50, yeah, 15 in every 100. So that's about 15%, about 14. African Americans are higher, so there may be more of a genetic link there, right? And then Native Americans are a little bit higher. Maybe their genetics can't fight off the CO2 that are in urban cities. Where the white people are about the same, and Hispanic, Latino a little bit higher, but about the same. And then Asian Americans less, which is interesting. Why would the Asian American culture have less asthma? I don't know. There could even be a cultural thing where they just say, well, you have bad breathing, but you don't need to see a doctor for it. There could be a cultural piece there too. We don't know. So now into children with special brains and special bodies. Now, some of these terms are actually very serious, and they sound very heavy and very weighted, but they're very simply broken down into something more understandable. When we say psychopathology, yikes, that sounds really dire, right? But just remember the word pathology means something, it's like a study of something that's not working. Pathology. So it could be a pathogen, it could be like a virus like COVID, but it could be something that's like environmental, like domestic violence, psychopathology. But psycho also refers to the person, right? So it's basically saying what is psychologically not right with a person, right? Developmental psychopathology is saying how did somebody's, let's say somebody has an irrational fear of spiders, and I mean like can't even look at it in a magazine 100 feet away, right? Irrational fear of spiders. Developmental psychopathology would talk about where did that develop across the lifespan, where we talk about developmental psychology or developmental issues here. Psychopathology is like how did they develop like in their psyche, in their emotional and their stability in their head. So again, I have friends who had been through some pretty interesting stuff as kids, and now as adults, you see there's a struggle there, right, to maintain relationships or even start relationships or have like normal expectations for relationships. So developmental psychopathology will talk about where maybe this breakdown, like Erickson would say, trust versus mistrust, did that occur? First 3 months, 6 months of life? Possibly. So this is a nice, like putting it together, like, oh, why did this happen? Or why does that person act like this? So for example, looking ahead into Erickson, he talks later in adolescence about how we're trying to find out who we are, right? Role versus identity confusion. Now, there's a lot of kids who know who they are pretty young, meaning some kids know like I was born as a girl, but I really feel like a boy, and vice versa. Some people know that really early. That has nothing to do with anything being wrong with their brain. When you have somebody who's a teenager and they're like cutting on themselves, that is what we consider a pathology. There is some sort of root to that in their past, and so developmental psychologists always try to like dig. So technically, Freud is a developmental psychologist, right? But he sort of identified psychopathology, but he wouldn't say it was pathology. He would call it hysteria. He would call it influences, right? He would call it the psychosexual influences and whatnot. So keep in mind that abnormality is normal, meaning there is no normal. There's no one person who's exactly down the middle of the road, perfect. I mean, some people could be stronger, taller, shorter, faster, thinner, whiter, richer. I don't know, right? But everybody is different. Abnormality is normal. It's so funny. We always fight against these different groups who are so different from us, but they're not really different from us. That's why I get so. It's my Alexis Rose. No. Disability changes year by year. So you can have a child who has a pretty significant learning disability in the 2nd grade, but then went through some therapy and supports, and by the time they're in 10th grade, it might still be there, but it's lessened, right? Or puberty kicks in and it makes it worse, right? So we don't know, but things change. Everything changes, right? So for somebody who had bouts of depression, COVID made things worse, yeah? Things change over the years. And so a lot of times people say, well, you got diagnosed with one thing and that's it. That's all you got. Okay, but later is later. And here's another secret. Just because somebody got diagnosed with a mental disorder doesn't mean that other people don't have it too. People always kind of do this thing where it's like there's such a stigma against mental illness or mental disorders. I would say like 80% of America is depressed right now, it may be short-term depression, maybe light depression, not super deep, but we're all out of sorts. We're all out of sync. We're all out of we're not living our best lives. We're not, right? So sometimes that creates a small either called seasonal or cyclothymic, or depression not otherwise specified, or it could be like a stage of life depression. A lot of us lost family members during this time. There's that. There's mourning on top of that, right? So disabilities change year by year. They can be worse and sometimes and better in others. And again, life might get better or worse in adulthood. I mean, you'll hear stories in our book about people who had these struggles, but then they're like super successful. Like Steve Jobs had a learning disability. Steven Spielberg, learning disability. Whoopi Goldberg, learning disability. Adam Levine, learning disability. Like, so you'll see that it doesn't determine your future, but it can get better or can maybe get worse. Yeah. Diagnosis and treatment reflects the social context. A lot of people still don't like to go to get therapy, but they will take medicine for stuff. So just keep that in mind, right? When you're working with kids, that even you're thinking in the back of your head, this kid needs meds, right? But the parents are against it. You don't really have a say. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. So again, we talked about IQ earlier, and this is just how we measure the mind. On page, let's double check. Page, let's see, the bell curve is in here. Here we go. The bell curve is on the bottom of page 321. It's the theoretical distribution of IQ scores, figure 11.3. And yeah, it talks about everybody's mostly in the average range, which is a little bit above and a little bit below, right? And sometimes if you're not feeling great, you're not, like, your brain's not working well. Have you ever been like driving your car and been kind of like dazed and confused for whatever reason? You're tired or you're stressed or you're just whatever. Yeah, that actually could, our physical body, our physical wellness can affect not your overall IQ, because that really only changes plus or minus like 2 or 3. But you might not be firing on all cylinders, right? So when we measure IQ, it's just gives us an idea of where the kids are. So what he's doing is one of the 12 subsets where they say, like, here's this box, this little cube, flip it on its side, flip it on its axis. How many sides? Or if it, like, they ask you a bunch of questions about it, or they ask you, or put this below that, or put this above that, or put it behind that, or stack one in the middle, or make a pattern, or, things like that. Like, kind of like brain twisters a little bit, but they just want to see how you physically manipulate stuff, how fast you come up with an answer, if you come up with an alternative answer, or have an alternative way of doing it, things like that. So again, the Flynn effect means that we have gotten smarter over the years, that eventually the average IQ will be over 100, and then the whole thing will shift a little bit, but it'll still have the same distribution, where most people are in the middle and less people are out here, and then there's very few out here, right? So people with super, super IQ are very rare, and people with super, super low IQ are very rare. And so we have to basically talk about what's normal, so then we can talk about what doesn't fit into the expected normal expectations. So when you have like a third grader, when some third graders are just, learning how to write a paragraph or 3 sentences in a row with proper punctuation and spacing, you have another kid who's like hammering out a book. You're like, in the 3rd grade, you're like, what's happening? You will get a variance in kids like that, or you'll get a kid who's like just not having it with math, but when it comes to art, you're like, wow, this kid's already like an animator, and they're like 6. You'll see it. You'll see gifted stuff show up, and that would be a get up in here. Very rare, right? But there are teachers who do study the gifted child and specifically work with gifted kids. So that's kind of nice too. If that specialty really floats your boat, then go for it. Now, genius is way, way up here. This is like Einstein and all people, like, yeah, way, way up here. Our book talks about a gifted child on the bottom of page 322. It talks about this kid doing this art, which is unbelievable. It doesn't say how old he is, but he looks like he's maybe about 9 or 10. And he's doing art that looks like museum, like unbelievable. It says he's an artist, and his family and culture recognize his talent by buying the art supplies, giving him time and place to paint, and selling his creations. Did he lose anything because of his talent? Like Picasso did, because Picasso was sequestered for being so talented, right? Is it taking things away? Is it taking a childhood away from a kid when you give them everything that they want and let them go down a rabbit hole? Hopefully there's some balance there, but if he wants to paint, wouldn't it be worse to not let him paint? Yeah, interesting. So again, right in here, this is really a good identifier of high school. Honestly, like high school, technically 85 is where you would have like mild learning disabilities here, like a slow learner. And we all kind of knew who those people were. Like sometimes they're in the class. Let's say they were a great, like again, writing English and writing sentences, they were great at it, but when it came to math, they had to go to a different class. No problem. That's what schools are set up to do. So pretty much in this range and above is going to be your high school, right? There's a correlation with like 110 usually means like an AA degree, and 120 means like bachelor's, or 130 usually means master's, something in there. So it's there's a correlation, but not always exactly true. Again, with our gardeners, you could be really smart in one area and not real smart in other areas, and that's okay because not everybody's good at everything. It's impossible, right? But there are some people, but it's very rare, right? Okay, so again, there's many different intelligences. This is the young man who won the spelling bee, right? There's a national spelling bee. He won it. It was like a big deal a while ago. But just remember, our brain keeps growing till 25. It doesn't stop at 18, right? It keeps going even after high school. So that's why it's great to go to college. Just go and get it done, right? Because I'm telling you, it's hard to go back when you're older. But again, we talked about specific or dependent and independent variables. And again, when a child's not exposed to certain things, they might not know. Let's say this kid was never exposed to sculpting, but he's a really good sculptor, but nobody knows now because he's just been doing spelling bees. There's kind of a kind of like an argument here, like should you only do this one thing that you're good at, or should you do a lot of different things to get good at everything? So again, that's all personal preference, right? And cultural, there's a cultural piece there. But children with disorders often have unusual brain patterns. That's a nice way of saying that. So again, Gardner, we talked about this. This is our areas: linguistic, magical, mathematical, musical, spatial. These are people who are good at like architecture, building, doing 3D stuff, wood shop, auto body, that kind of stuff. Bodily kinesthetic, this is like dancing, choreography. Interpersonal is between people, when you can like read people really well. Intrapersonal is with yourself. Naturalistic is nature, obviously, and existential is very like a spiritual. I knew kids who were like meditating at 7. Yeah, existentially is very, very strong. And again, each association with a certain region of the brain, right? So kids who are good at math, it's going to be on their left-hand logical side. Kids who are good at visual spatial, maybe art and 3D and stuff like that, are going to be on the right-hand side. So different parts of the brain are more developed or less than others, right? So it's not like we get a brain scan when we're born and say, oh, this child's going to naturally be a choreographer. No, but we can develop that in children if that's what they want to do, right? But Sternberg talked about types of intelligence. Only 3 though: academic intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. So here's where you have a friend who might be really book smart, but really life dumb, right? I have friends who are super smart, but can't pay a bill on time. Yeah. Same thing with creative. I've met a lot of artists who can't pay a bill on time, right? Right. So it's really kind of interesting. So Sternberg talked about like, are you good at school? Are you good in like, you have street smarts, which is that practical piece, or are you like that creative type? I think it's important to have all 3, right? Because again, just being smart at a book doesn't mean that you're smart at life. And being smart at life doesn't mean that you know enough to get you ahead, right? Maybe just for that daily hustle, sure. And then creative is great. Great. I love it. If you can get all these pieces together. Now again, both of these aren't so scientifically based, right? Where it says applications may not be supported by scientific research. Like, yes, we can kind of identify the parts of the brain for people who are good at linguistics. They have a highly developed Broca's area in their brain, which is good for language, but it's also good for analyzing things, right? In terms of language and creative writing and prose and writing a book and English structure and all that. So we do know where that matches up. But in regards to Sternberg, it doesn't mean that he's wrong. It's just that we don't have exact science to support it. So again, it's like, believe it if you want, but more research would be nice, right? So brain scans are a really great way to figure out what's going on with a child's brain, but obviously if they're not medically needed, right? If there's no tumor, there's no family link, there's no reason to do a brain scan, we wouldn't do a brain scan. They're expensive. They do sedate children. That's not always great. Again, sedating children is very, very difficult because you have to factor in they're so little and things like that. But Peyton does have some brain stuff in his family. So we did have an fMRI last December, and it was clear. That particular test only shows like if there's a tumor, like a dot, blah, blah, blah. But there's other brain scans that'll tell you remember those, the nerve cells, the brain cells that we talked about? There's different parts of them, like the long strings, the dendrites. Some of the brain scans will tell you if those dendrites are formed, well formed, overly used, overly active, or missing, right? So some brain scans will actually show, like by color, what's going on in there. And for example, kids with autism have a highly overdeveloped visual cortex, meaning there's this freeway that goes from your eyeballs to the back of your head, and it's just like this huge like pipe of input. If you can, before you take 205 with me, watch Temple Grandin. It's a biopic. It was on HBO, but now I think it's on Netflix, Temple Grandin, or Amazon. But it's really, really good. It talks about Temple Grandin. She's also does TED Talks. One of the first people with autism to be able to identify what autism was and figure out what that did and why her brain was different. And so one of her famous quotes is, when you say, I'm going to go buy some tennis shoes today, she Rolodexes like 5,000 different shoes in her head. Like that's just how their brain works. And not every child with autism, but yeah, so a lot of visual cortex development in some brains, and maybe some people who are colorblind or are not really sensitive to color differences and variances have a less developed visual cortex, things like that. So again, there's some theories that say that autism has more wrinkles in the brain, has more topography in the brain. Some studies say that autism has the corpus callosum that goes right in between the two brain hemispheres is either underdeveloped, overdeveloped, or even missing. So again, the brain is a nice place to start when we're trying to figure out what is typical behavior. I don't like saying normal. Typical behavior versus atypical behavior, or expected behavior at this age versus unexpected behavior at this age. So let's say you're working with kindergartners, and most of them are on a tricycle right now, and some of them are in the sand pit, and some of them are running in the backyard, and some are on the swings. And then you have another one over here who wants to do your makeup, like Instagram worthy makeup. And you're like, but you're 5. And they do a good job. And you're like, yeah, you'll get outliers of behavior, but it all goes under neurodiversity. Neurodiversity. That means there's not one brain that is normal or we can all measure up against, because we're all different. It's just impossible to have the same brain, even as a twin. Now, sometimes you can have strengths in your brain and sometimes there's weaknesses. It could be physical, like if you were born with a weak spot in your brain, like some families have like brain issues that go through like strokes or like blood clots and things like that. Sometimes there's a genetic link, but sometimes a brain is like super strong and it's resilient and it can take a lot of abuse and mistreatment before everything starts falling apart. However, sometimes abuse or mistreatment at an early age does carry forth physically all the way to old age. So I think I added in some of the previous modules about how childhood experiences last a lifetime. And it's a TED Talk from Nadine Burke Harris. She's like in a red dress. Amazing. I would say that's for me, top 5 TED Talks of all time. Yeah. And so she's also our California Surgeon General right now, which is a beautiful thing. And those studies about adverse childhood experiences were actually conducted here in Southern California through Kaiser. And it crosses these adverse childhood experiences. They cross all demographics, genders, ethnicities, everything. The theory is when you are in a heightened emotional state for fear as a child, or you got abused, neglected, whatever, that actually causes chemical changes in our body. And we carry those forward into adulthood. So then you can then predict depression, suicidality, heart disease, cancer. Yeah, it's wild. It's mind blowing. And so that's another reason why I like doing child development work, because if you can cut all that stuff out, wouldn't society be better? Why don't we start at the bottom and work our way up? It's wild. There's a lot to think about. So again, here, neurodiversity seems particularly relevant for children with disorders on the spectrum. Meaning, trust me, he's a very unique child, but when we take him to that school, he's with 100 other unique children. And it's really interesting that you're like, okay, now he's with his tribe. They're all so different. So there's a saying that says, if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, because there's kids who are barely verbal. There are kids who are a little bit lower on the IQ spectrum. Some kids are really advanced. Sometimes there's no filter. Sometimes there's extra filters. And so it's really kind of an interesting mix, even in that one group, whatever. So sorry, it's a little loud. Can't hear that. And then here we talk about, again, some of this pathology doesn't show up until middle childhood. So for example, when kids are in preschool, what are they learning? Like, hi, this is a friend. This is where you put your backpack, right? And then kindergarten and even preschool is A, B, C, D, E. I mean, the basics. Scheduling, social, and basic stuff. Kindergarten, you're getting familiar with your first letter of your first name. And kindergarten, you only, in the state of California, only required to count up to number 30. I think that's a little low. But, counting, can this child count from 1 to 100? I remember that was a milestone. We're like, he can count to 100, woo, that kind of situation. But then here's the deal. Children aren't really sitting and reading at that point, right? Children's books are very picture-based. It's the adults reading to the children. So if you wouldn't know if there was a reading disability in a child right away. You wouldn't. But what happens is that when first grade hits, and then it's writing sentences and paragraphs and punctuation and remembering all the rules, and this word is spelled wrong, and this word has a different rules. And when the world starts getting more complicated, you'll see more of the learning disabilities show up. So the biggest referral time for, okay, let's maybe get this kid into special needs is 2nd grade. So you have a kid who's like doing pretty good, maybe, getting by with, C's or whatever, it's just fine. But the second life starts getting harder, and then the kid maybe has more energy, right? And the teacher can't handle them, and you've tried all your interventions. There's actually like an actual plan for interventions. And you've done all those interventions don't work, then there's like more steps to support the child. I've had a lot of parents call me and be like, wait a minute, my kid was normal and now he has ADHD. Like, the brain is still growing. The brain is still growing. And so sometimes that ADHD or the learning disability doesn't show up right away, right? It takes the environment to get a little bit more overwhelming. For if your skills aren't matching the environment, then we got to see what other supports are out there. So I don't really test on multifinality and equifinality, but it just talks about multi-factors going in and multi-factors expressing itself. So ADHD could look like a very productive person. If they're an organized person with ADHD, they can look hyperly productive. I have several grown friends with ADHD. Some are productive and some go through phases of being productive. So again, multifinality means that it can express itself in multiple ways. Like autism can look very different, right? And then equifinality has to do with all the different ways that it can exist. So it's really interesting because diagnosis and treatment can be very different for everybody as well. So we did allude to ADHD. It wasn't always in this DSM. DSM-5 is a book. In fact, I keep saying I should get one because I had one before and then I gave it away. It's like basically a Bible of mental disorders. And it has developed over time, and it's not always perfect. It used to have homosexuality in it. I took that out. It currently has video game addiction in it, right? It has gender dysmorphic disorder, meaning people who aren't sure what their gender is, things like that. That might come out later as it's not really a disorder. But again, in psychology or in mental health, we say it's not a problem till it's causing a problem. Like a little bit of a learning disability, if you're not failing your classes, it's not a huge problem. But if you're struggling, you're doing 6 hours of homework and you can't sleep and you have anxiety and heartburn in year 12, that's a problem, right? So again, ADHD has been a kind of a collection of symptoms, and it's now I think very specifically identified. There's 3 types. Okay, so there's inattentive type. So you may have seen a kid, and a lot of girls get this. Girls often get misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed with ADHD. You'll see this. Huh? What? Like that could be a form of ADHD. Yeah, and they kind of look, and again, teachers have biases, and we all have biases, and sometimes they're like, oh, well, she's a little spacey. Yeah, but if she's not catching up and she's failing her work and she's spending 6 hours doing her math homework, like there's something else there. It's called inattentive type. My godson has it, and he's in the Navy, so he's active. He's getting things going. By the way, high school, horrible for him. The Navy, amazing. So sometimes kids just need to land, He was a kid who was just kind of like standing there, but like a little bit off, you can see his eyes kind of moving a little bit. And I was like, dude, what's going on? He's like, I'm watching Star Wars in my head. Fair enough. Because that's probably the most interesting thing that's going on in this room right now, And so sometimes kids have other things going on in their heads. Same with the impulsive. The impulsive thing is the kid who knows all the rules, knows not to break the rules, doesn't want to get in trouble, says, I don't want to get in trouble, I'm trying not to get in trouble, and I still grabbed your stuff. They're impulsive. This thought like goes through their mind and they just do it. So like he's like Payne's walking by me in the kitchen last night and he kind of just rubs his elbow across me. And I was like, I know that that's impulsive for you, that it ran through your mind to do it, so you had to do it. But I just have to warn you, that is very aggressive. It's kind of like checking with the shoulder. You kind of like did that, like check me like across my back. And I was like, that's an act of aggression. You need to stop that. You do not get to touch my body without my permission. What's the big deal? It's just my elbow. I'm like, the big deal is that it ran through your mind, and the big deal is that you did not do that. You're 13, man. Like, I know that it's hard for you, and between 6 and 9 o'clock, that's his meds are worn off. Like, we know he is literally he's jumping on the bed, jumping on the floor. He's singing, chirping, barking. Like it's like the impulsivity is like way up. And then overactive or hyperactive is typically what we say. That's the kid who can't sit still. That's the kid who can't sit still. And then you add in the impulsiveness, and then sometimes you still have the inattentive. You can have the mixed presentation. And there's a lot to handle there. But again, if you're working in a preschool, they all have ants in the pants, right? So there's this thing where, preschool will be like, well, I didn't understand why little Tommy couldn't sit still for circle time for 45 minutes. Little Tommy's 4. You're lucky if you get 4 minutes out of him. Lucky if you get 4 minutes out of him. So a lot of times, again, I've said this at the beginning, when people don't know developmental milestones, they get confused, right? So if you know what's normal at 4 and you expect more than that child can give, then that's on you. That's 100% on you. Now, for a full diagnosis, the symptoms have to be present before age 12. Very easy to do. Nobody just like all of a sudden after the age of 12 becomes ADHD. No, not at all. You see it a mile away, right? And again, there's mild, moderate, severe, right? People with mild can kind of just chill out a little bit. Trust me, I've asked my doctor on multiple occasions, are you sure I don't have ADHD? She's like, nope, you're just busy. I was like, again, there's more boys who get diagnosed, about 4 to 1. For every 4 boys that are diagnosed, 1 girl is diagnosed. It doesn't necessarily mean that it would be equals ever, but a lot of girls get misdiagnosed. Yeah, and a lot of times, you know, there's an opposite thing too, where parents are like, oh, well, he's just a boy, he's just rambunctious. Yeah, absolutely, a big fan of being rambunctious, but rambunctious in a classroom, it's not going to work. You got to learn how to turn it on and turn it off, and that takes a while. So sometimes we do have to recommend that for special education. And again, there's no genetic marker. They're talking about maybe a family pattern of it. Same with learning disabilities. They haven't identified a gene for it, but it can run in families. Comorbid is a fancy term, and it sounds terrible. It sounds like there's death involved, but it's not. It just means I'd rather the word be co-occurring. Think of it as co-occurring. There's ADHD is co-occurring with other conditions. You'll get ADHD and autism, like my kid. You'll get ADHD and gifted. You'll get ADHD and emotional disturbances or emotional issues. You'll get ADHD and a kid in a wheelchair could have ADHD. A kid who's blind can have ADHD. But it does group up typically with the more unique brain situations like autism and gifted and even emotionally disturbed. So sometimes all 4 can exist together, which is wild. All right. And again, an ADHD, they say it's higher in the United States, and that could be for several reasons. We're so indoors and on our devices and whatnot. And so, or we have such high expectations because our education system's not strong anymore. And so we have high expectations of them sitting in a seat for 45 minutes and then we overdiagnose. There's a lot of kids who are misdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, and overmedicated. It happens. Again, misdiagnosis means you got identified as ADHD and you're just super peppy. You're just super outgoing. It doesn't mean you have ADHD, right? Some people get overdiagnosed. Sometimes they're given stimulants like Ritalin. Trust me, Ritalin. I have to scan my driver's license to pick up my kid's medicine. Right. And we had like an issue this week about, oh, we ran out of pills, but I really just gave too many pills to the school because he does take 1 pill during the day. We were like, oh my God, like, what do we do? Because we're not going to get any more. And the pharmacy was like, that is a controlled substance. And like, it was a big deal. But we have to really look at what is ADHD. Like, what is it? It's this inability to focus. Well, sometimes our brain is just not ready. Sometimes it's not a great time of day. Sometimes it's not the great subject. I mean, and there's 1,000 excuses, but let's work around them to maybe say like, okay, well, this kid can't work 45 minutes in a row, but can they work for 5 minutes and then get up and walk around? Yeah, then let's do that. So it really takes a lot of people to understand. Oh, 11:47. I'll end here, but it takes a lot of people to understand what typical development is before you can understand what atypical development is. So I think this is it. Yeah. Let's see here. The others talked about treatment and ADHD. Okay, so I'll talk about learning disorders tomorrow. I'll start on slide 30 and go to slide 40 tomorrow. We'll do that. So yeah, we went over a little bit over time, but ladies, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I need to upload this video and get that going out there right now. But I'm so proud of you for guys. I was gonna have to lecture to like nobody. So it's great. It's great that you guys are here. Any questions before we go? Okay, go back to your normal lives and okay. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow. If not, next week.
Thank you.
Bye.